Hello, my name's Rich. Um, this is the second of my videos regarding my path with my sobriety and some of the other difficulties that I've overcome. Um, I didn't really detail a whole lot of my life in the last video. Um, I guess I'll start from the beginning. Uh, my mother was born here in the U.S. My father was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Um, they married probably about a year before I was born or conceived. And when I was born, the night I was born was considered probably one of the most notable in the history of the hospital I was born in, because there was a flooding of the basement where all the power was. The generator or power source got knocked out due to the heavy rains, and so the hospital had to go by candlelight. There weren't, any emergency lights or anything like that. This is back in the early '60s, and they made the decision with the women who were pregnant and ready to give birth, do it by candlelight. So I was born by candlelight, and in getting me out of my mother, they also had to use instruments, and the instruments must have grabbed an area near my eyes and bruised my skin, and I came out with two black eyes. My father made the joke at the time, he's got two black eyes, he's a born fighter. My dad, by all reasoning, was by far my best friend I've ever had. Unfortunately, in 1969, I lost him in a car accident on Valentine's Day. It was especially tough for my mother because her birthday and their anniversary was the same week. So to have all three of these things devastatingly happen was a very hard thing. Um, as a child, I was not allowed or not permitted to go to the funeral, even though I wanted to. I was 7, 7.5 years old. She thought that it would be better for me if I didn't go, which, in retrospect, we both come to agree that was not the best decision. Um, in many ways, even though the police came to the house when the accident occurred, I never saw his body, so for many years I did not believe that he died. I didn't have the closure, as they call it. He was just gone. And my mother did not want to talk about it. And in the many years since passing, I now understand where she came from in not wanting to talk about it. But that was probably the worst thing for her and for me. I have a younger sister who was young enough to not really remember my dad. Um, what I proceeded to do was make sure that I didn't forget him. Remembered moments, remembered as much as I could, and it's something that in some ways benefited me, in some ways did not benefit me, Most of the non beneficial stuff was when I was younger because I couldn't grasp what I was trying to remember. It was I remembered good things, but there was sadness involved, and I had no one to talk to in order to get past it. Relatives uh, did not, in many ways, step forward. I did have one uncle who took me under his wing and got me involved with sports, even though looking back, I wasn't really a sports kid. I was more of a kid who was interested in animals, science. I actually wanted at one point to become an archaeologist. Um, After my father's passing, we moved back to our hometown, and we would go to the local mall. And back in those days, most men wore suits as well as dress hats. Um, and every time we go into the mall, a guy from behind would resemble my father, and my heart would jump. Then, when the gentleman turned around, I was crushed. Not having anybody to talk to about this made it all the more difficult. But there was a part of me that did not want to give up. It was the fighter my dad possibly anointed me with. Um, we moved back. When we moved back, we had been renting the home that we owned to another family, and they were stubbornly not moving out. I don't recall the amount of months that it took to get back into the house, but it took quite some time. And we were living with friends of the family for a pretty distinct time. Um, it became very difficult because the family that occupied our house also went to the same schools as us. The kids were pretty rotten and said a lot of things that we were trying to do when in reality we were just trying to get our own home back. Um, I got bullied and mistreated, and these are things that many times I didn't share with anyone else. I had kids make fun of my father passing. So on top of the bullying, it also became a thing of throwing my dead father in there. Eventually, we got back into the house, and I think a lot of this stuff affected me in adverse ways. I became there in areas where there hadn't been a mean streak. It was there, and I would be mean to people who I knew couldn't hurt me. And in subtle ways. I also developed a thing for lying, and many of the lies that I had were very transparent. And, it was me trying to adjust to life without my father. Shortly thereafter, we moved in. A year or two later, my mom started seeing a gentleman who worked at GM, friend of the family, who was an alcoholic. She saw him on a regular basis, and I think in some ways it was good to have a male there. He would take me to ball games and hockey games with my mom and my sister. But also, he was a raging alcoholic. And I think that person made it seem okay for me to drink. At about 11, I started developing a like for drinking. And it wasn't a like because I liked to drink. It altered my mood. It made me, perhaps, for a moment, forget some of the pain that I was holding within. I had nowhere else to go out. This went on for a few years, and then my mom stopped seeing him, and she started going to Parents Without Partners. And she ended up meeting a guy. And this is where I'll end this segment. Um, there's a lot more to this, but I'm generalizing. But up to this point, looking back, I can see where my alcoholism was growing. I had a lot of pain and nowhere for it to go. And I found a release through alcohol. I hope anybody that watches this understand and can understand that this is a joke. This isn't funny to me. I've been through a lot of things and I've come out the other side. And I'm trying to help anyone who feels like they may be trapped, that they too can find a way out.